everyone. Welcome to the 355th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And he is in a bad mood because he does not have enough caffeine, so prepare for the worst, y'all.
Grr.
We're going to have a great show despite Kevin being a little grumpy because we are going to be talking about a lot of fun things, including a $100 million vehicle security effort from Ford and ADT, an update on U.S. antitrust rules. We've got a whole segment on Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7. We're going to be talking about robots in a couple different ways. One is an update on one of our favorite robot toy companies. Another is making a digital assistant a little bit more trustworthy. We're going to do a little bit on Tado, which is a European smart home company going public. And we have a really cool, I'm just going to call it really cool research on sensors that I think is worth noting. We're also going to hear from our sponsor, Rightpoint. And we're going to be talking to our guest this week, Calais Nair, who is this co-founder and director of a company called Plentify, who is trying to give your home appliances energy storage capabilities. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Before we get started, let's hear from another one of our sponsors. We've got a new sponsor this week. It is Hologram. And Hologram's experts are here to help you understand how cellular IoT is designed to work and prepare you for a successful deployment. Their latest white paper breaks down IoT architecture from the framework of hardware and software components to why it's important and offers some real-life examples. You can visit hologram.io/Stacy to download your copy of the IoT architecture white paper today. That's hologram.io/Stacy. Okay, Kevin.
I'm feeling better because I got some coffee in me now.
Good. Man, y'all, when I started this call, Kevin was like, and I was like, oh.
Well, my Keurig broke after 7 years, and I was kind of in a pinch. So luckily I had a kind family member run over to Dunkin' Donuts, hit the drive-thru, and get me some coffee.
So is your Keurig coming? So you already have a new one coming. Is it connected?
It's not connected, but at least this one is an updated version of what I have now that has a programmable timer so it can turn on by itself at a certain time of the day, which is good because I've tried to smarten my old Keurig with a smart plug, but it just doesn't work because it's got a hard switch for the power. There's just no way to turn it on by giving it juice, so to speak.
Yeah, you need a servo attached to some sort of thing, and that's a pain.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
yep.
You know what else we're going to talk about? I purchased an appliance as well. We'll talk about that at the end. Okay, let's hit our stories. This week, Ford and ADT announced a joint venture they're calling Canopy. They're putting $100 million into this. And Kevin, what is it going to do?
So I'll tell you what they say it's going to do. It's going to bring, quote unquote, breakthrough technology for vehicle security. I disagree with that quote because really what they're doing is bringing everything we've learned in terms of services, AI, and connected cameras from the smart home, and they're putting it into vehicles. I say that because that's really what this is. Ford and ADT will, as you said, spend $100 million to build out this Canopy company, which is live. There's not much information on the website yet, but what we do know so far is that Ford will be offering self-installed connected cameras for your minivan or your truck bed next year to watch the cargo area. Eventually, they will offer integrated cameras in vehicles that will monitor both the entire interior as well as the surrounding area outside of your vehicle. All this will come at a cost, and that's where ADT comes in. There will be a subscription service, and you will have the Safe by ADT service involved. So that way, if the camera detects something that could be leading towards a break-in or it hears glass or something like that, ADT will be notified and can send local authorities to your vehicle right off the bat. You'll also have access to the cameras and sensors from your smartphone through the Canopy app, which doesn't exist yet. So it's kind of like Tesla's Sentry mode. For people who are familiar with that, where Tesla will let you tap into the cameras in your Tesla vehicle through your smartphone app and see what's going on and get alerts and so on. But it's Ford doing it. And at first I'm like, this is kind of silly, but it makes sense because Ford's expertise arguably is in building vehicles. It's far easier for them to invest a portion of $100 million, work with a company that already does this type of monitoring and has the experience of their smart home security and service monitoring plans and customer service. It just makes sense for Ford to just pay something to create this joint venture and let them focus on the big issues and the big money problems that they have to face in the vehicle industry. So this makes sense. And I think you'll probably see other car companies get involved with maybe ADT or other types of monitoring services in the future.
Yeah. So the two things that jump out at me for this story is one, got to get that recurring revenue stream. Woo, woo.
Yep.
So covered that. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is, y'all know I have a Tesla and I bought it in 2015. So in that time frame, I still have it and it was used when I bought it. So I have now replaced the onboard memory because we had a little memory glitch happen in there.
The eMMC memory modules, yes.
Exactly. So we replaced that. And then just this, like late last year, I replaced my 3G modem with a 4G LTE modem because the 3G service was getting sunset. And I mention this because vehicles still, we might be hitting a change point, but a lot of people keep their vehicle for, a decade or more. And so, and it's longer right now because of the pandemic, because it's so hard to find new vehicles and buy them. So I think it's interesting to think about the types of technology. Tesla's been doing this, and you see it having to replace things. And Elon Musk has actually talked about like, hey, this is a computer now, and computers don't last for 10 years, y'all. That was his defense on the memory module replacements. But I think we're going to have to, one of the things Canopy will have to figure out is how to address like putting smart hardware into a car that might need to then have it upgraded at like the 7-year mark. So, because like, I don't know, like I'm from Texas and people there, if you're actually using your truck, you keep your truck for a while. Now, this might be for fleets and professional things, and those people actually cycle out their vehicles much more quickly. But it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about.
I agree with you. I think it really comes down to the connectivity modules because that's what seems to be changing at a faster pace now. I don't know. I'm not saying 4G networks are going to get sunset next year or anything like that, but it will happen at some point. So if there's a simple modem swap or whatever, that's fine. The cameras themselves in this case and other sensors, they're going to still work just fine. I don't think that they'll be needed to swap out those, especially if they have like the connectivity because they can do the AI in the cloud. Perhaps if they do local AI, maybe things change there and maybe not need to swap out cameras in the future. But to me, it comes down to the connectivity more than anything else.
Yeah, that's actually very easy. I mean, I assume they'll design something modular. The swap out on the Tesla, it cost us $250. It was just a box that I brought it in. I think they had a line, so they kept my car for longer. But the labor cost associated was like an hour or 2 hours. So anyway, so we'll see what happens there. Okay, moving on. Tuesday this week, the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department's Antitrust Division got together, issued a news conference, and said, hey, you know what, y'all? We are going to review our existing rules on how we evaluate M&A deals. And this is a big deal because for the last couple of years, the people who are leading these agencies and generally Democrats and a lot of people, even in Republicans, are looking at how big tech has gotten. And the concern, well, there's lots of concerns. There's antitrust concerns. There's concerns about how it affects workers and worker rights, how it affects our ability to innovate, given all the supply chain issues, People are worried there. So what this means, and we don't exactly know how they're going to change things. They've basically said, we're going to review how we look at it. We're going to open it up for comments. So they're asking for, and these documents come out and they ask questions. So some of the questions they're asking is, how does M&A harm workers, suppliers, innovation? And they also said, hey, are we actually capturing the concerns we might have about competition with our current rules? Which is like, basically, hey, should we rewrite how we think about competition? And in the US, we tend to think about competition based on consumer harms. In the EU, they look at like market concentration more. So our market, you have to document consumer harms, which can be hard with tech because a lot of the stuff, the tech companies give it away for free and then, use data to monetize it or, lock people in ways that may not exactly be harmful because you can always point to the fact that, well, we offer much lower prices, but could have harms in other areas. So I think this is going to be a really interesting and big shift. We just don't know how it's going to play out. And on the IoT side, look, there's a lot of M&A here. This is just a big macro story that's going to affect all of technology. On the IoT side, I expect it to, should Google have ended up buying Fitbit? I don't know. Are they going to undo that merger? Probably not. Well, maybe not. I don't know. Everything feels so up in the air right now. But there's a lot of opportunity in consumer IoT around consolidation. There's also things like Amazon and how it invests and preferences its technology over others. So we'll just see. I mean, I'm going to be keeping an eye on this, and I will probably write something once we have a little bit more information from the agencies involved and see which way the wind is blowing. So stay tuned.
I hope that they consider the portability of data in these matters, because that's partially where the lock-in problem comes. And I say this just because I had a very frustrating experience. It's not IoT related, but you could apply this to pretty much any service. I decided I don't want my passwords stored in my browser anymore. I don't want them with Google. And on my iPhone and my iPad, they're all with Apple. And the main reason I was debating on switching to something else, not because of either of those companies, but because when I use my different devices, my Chromebooks with Google or my iPad and iPhone with Apple, my password databases are not in sync. So I'm frustrated. So I decided to switch over to a password manager. I went with 1Password. It was easy to transport my passwords out of Google, but for Apple, you can't do it on an iPhone and you can't do it on an iPad. You have to do it on a Mac in Safari. And I don't have a Mac with Safari, and there's no more Safari for Windows. So I have to sign in to somebody else's Mac here in the home, log in, sync my passwords, and then export them. It's just these kinds of making it challenging or difficult, these barriers to getting at your own data has to be part of what they look at with M&A, in my opinion.
I'll also just throw this out here, y'all. If you are storing your passwords in browsers, there's actually some malware called Redline Stealer that's been it's been in the news a lot. And basically it can go in and steal your passwords from your browser, which means nobody should be doing this. Be like Kevin. I know people are like, I don't want to spend money.
Well, at least in this case.
Yeah, you need to do it. So, all right, moving right along. Wi-Fi. Oh, Kevin.
Which flavor?
Which flavor of Wi-Fi? Which number? So we saw a story this week from The Verge saying they looked at the FCC filings. They saw that Eero could be close to launching a Wi-Fi 6E mesh networking system. So quick recap for everyone. Most of us, if you haven't updated your routers in 2 years, you're probably still running Wi-Fi 5, which is honestly just fine. You're fine in the home. If you're on the more cutting edge, like Kevin and I, you might have a Wi-Fi 6 router. And this is great because it has greater bandwidth. It can deal with more traffic running around in the home. It has lower latencies, and it has a little bit that will help with IoT devices, but it's really more for video and computers and things that are a little bit more intense. And I will say higher end, because with all of these Wi-Fi standard updates, the routers are backwards compatible. So your Wi-Fi 5 gear will work on your Wi-Fi 6 router, but you won't be able to take advantage of the Wi-Fi 6 capabilities if you're on a Wi-Fi 5 device, right? And IoT devices are not going to be using Wi-Fi 6 chips for a while. So that's your smart home devices. Okay, so knowing all of that, Eero, though, is like, boom, Wi-Fi 6E. And 6E is Wi-Fi 6 enhanced. So it's basically, it's the same engineering in Mac and Phi layer for Wi-Fi 6, but 6E opens up a whole new swath of spectrum. Most of your Wi-Fi runs on something called 2.4 or 5 gigahertz spectrum. Wi-Fi 6E goes all the way down to 6 gigahertz. And you're like, what? Who cares? You care because 6 gigahertz is emptier and it has more capacity for delivering greater bandwidth. I'm not going to get into the whys because y'all don't want an education in spectrum, I bet.
Not as good through walls and such, but faster bandwidth in general.
Yes. So 6E is going to be good for offices, like open plan offices, good for some video stuff. It's not really for IoT. But Eero's probably doing this because they are working to both get into the enterprise, like SMB kind of space, and also to provide something for ISPs who want to offer better routers. Because basically right now, if you get a router from your ISP, you're like, yeah, it might even be Wi-Fi 5. Blah, Wi-Fi 5.
Be like Kevin. Don't do that.
Exactly. So that's Eero's could be close to launching this. We do expect to see there are Wi-Fi 6E gear out there already. It's super pricey. Again, it's not really for the smart home or homes. It's much more appropriate for enterprises right now. But, here we are.
Yeah, laptops these days, newer ones come with Wi-Fi 6. They're not even on 6E typically. Most of the newest flagship phones are Wi-Fi 6 with, obviously, they work on Wi-Fi 5 as well. Tablets, same thing. So there's very few 6E devices out there. I wouldn't rush out to grab a 6E unless when these are available, it's time for you to upgrade from an old router.
Or you could wait a year and get Wi-Fi 7.
Wi-Fi 7. Oh, my goodness.
So, Kevin, what's MediaTek doing?
Yes, MediaTek this week showed the world's first live demo of Wi-Fi 7 technology. So they're building some chips with integrated Wi-Fi 7 and they want to show them off. And that's fine. This happens all the time with new standards and new technologies. This always comes first and then the products come usually much later.
About 18 months later.
Yeah, well, maybe then they're spot on because what they're saying is products with Wi-Fi 7 are expected to hit the market starting in 2023, which theoretically is 12 to 24 months. It's in the window. What they're saying is it'll also have triple bands such as that Wi-Fi 6 has. So 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, 6 gigahertz. But with the same number of antennas as Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 7 will bump your speeds 2.4 times. So they're using really, really wide 320 megahertz channels, as well as some other modulation technology. I won't get into that either. But yeah, so much less latency. And you noticed something about the latency that you are really excited about. You were excited for an enterprise standpoint. I was excited from a consumer standpoint.
Before I tell you why I was excited, Kevin, I want to tell you also that just broadly speaking, the advances in Wi-Fi are not about capacity, which we call speed, right? Most of them, we're like at multi-gigabit speeds on Wi-Fi. So for most people in most use cases, you're going to stop looking at speed as the big factor for upgrading and start looking at some of the other things like latency and quality of service and number of devices that can communicate and things like power draw. So I want to bring that really to the forefront because it's a shift for how most normal people think about faster Wi-Fi.
We have all the speeds we need. I mean, you could do 8K video over Wi-Fi 6.
Yeah. So, and it's actually, honestly, it's the same thing that's going to be happening with cellular radios too, like 5G and the 5G to 6G transition. So that's the macro picture. But I am really excited because Wi-Fi 7 has something called deterministic latency. And Deterministic latency basically means that the latency, which is how long it takes data to hit your router or device to router, router to device, that sort of thing, means that it's no longer a best effort game. You can actually prioritize different types of packets. And this is a big deal in enterprise networking because let's say you have a machine that is on a separate Wi-Fi system. It'll be Wi-Fi 7, and it is communicating with workers about safety. So if a sensor detects that a worker is intruding over that Wi-Fi system, you could actually get an almost instantaneous response and deliver like true quality of service to ensure that that message gets priority on the Wi-Fi system. And that's a big deal. Because right now it's actually, we've talked about this in the past. We have something called time-sensitive networking. That is a whole separate standard that is currently used. But with Wi-Fi 7, it sounds like some of those capabilities might get embedded into just broad Wi-Fi, which also means it could go into the home.
And there I can see at least two use cases where I would want to use this. First, nobody else is going to care about, but I will say it, is online gaming, because latency is everything with online gaming. But more importantly, with the smart home, I would want my security devices to have priority over pretty much anything else so that I have an instant notification or an instant video feed that's live showing something's here instead of these 3 to 5 second time delays to, somebody rings the doorbell and all of a sudden it takes, 3 seconds to show up the video on my smart display, etc. So as a consumer, I'd like to be able to determine, I don't want all these low priority packets fighting with these high priority packets. Give the high priorities the priority they deserve.
Yes. And I should note that we're calling it Wi-Fi 7 because the Wi-Fi Alliance switched from doing their old naming stuff to this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 thing. But if you care, it is IEEE spec 802.11be. And they're actually planning to publish this sometime in 2024.
Which tells me we'll have Wi-Fi 7 pre-certified devices next year.
Exactly. So there's your update on Wi-Fi. Again, do not rush out and buy any of this unless you happen to be upgrading. When you're upgrading, update to the highest available one that you can at your budget. So.
And go mesh, go mesh, go mesh.
Oh yeah, and go mesh. Always go mesh. Always go mesh. Okay, let's talk about robots. And I'm going to let you tackle this because it's robots. It's robots, although I loved Sphero. So if y'all remember Sphero, this is going to harken you back to those heady days in 2013, 2014.
Yeah, well, let's go back to one of our favorite robot names, Misty Robotics. Remember those? Yeah. They're still alive, but really not doing too well. And a Swedish social robotics company called Furhat Robotics, it's an interesting name. They are doing an all-cash deal for Misty Robotics. They're going to keep Misty in the U.S., which is based in Colorado, keep a bunch of the senior staff members. The brand is still staying put. And although Furhat focuses on social robotics, they believe this gives them an in where Misty is prevalent, and that is education. I never used the Misty Robotics products, but we've seen demos of them, and
we wanted to buy one, but they were just so expensive.
They were just too expensive.
We had the founder of Misty who worked at Sphero on the show a while back, like way back.
Right. And that's part of the story too. And that's because Misty spun out of Sphero. And when I think of Sphero, I think of the little, like the BB-8 small round robot from Star Wars that Sphero used to sell. Maybe they still do. I don't know. It's all about Grogu and Baby Yoda these days, but whatever. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to see Misty Robotics go away. So I kind of like this deal. They didn't disclose the terms or anything like that, but it's good to know that Misty is staying alive.
I feel like there's this whole, I don't know if it's impractical nostalgia or love affair with these home robots. You had Misty, there's Anki, for example, that got purchased and then Did you ever get your update for Anki? I know you backed the Kickstarter. Okay.
Yeah. No, I have, I get software updates with the Anki, and they're doing all kinds of things. They even have you can run your own local server, so that way you don't have to have it go to the cloud for everything. Sure, there's a lot going on there. I mean, it's such a limited little robot. That's why I don't talk about it too much. It's not like the robot of my dreams, because I do want something that can help around the house. And
yes, Kevin has a robot of his dreams.
Yes.
Did you just say have a conversation?
Yeah, no, we can watch the Book of Boba Fett together and chat about, the future. Why not? Why not?
Why not? In fact,
I need friends in this pandemic age. I need social interaction.
Friends are important, especially with robots, which is what MIT researchers have discovered. A researcher, Anastasia Ostrowski, who is a research assistant in the personal robotics group in the MIT Media Lab, authored a paper about turning robots, what kind of skills and engagement a robot or a digital assistant needs to be better in the home, to help work with families that include children or older people, and what makes a robot approachable. And I thought this was interesting. They basically talk about like having a robot make eye contact and then look down, so it's not like creepily looking at you. It did a lot of user interaction studies with families interacting with voice assistants, robots.
And the Jibo. Remember the old Jibo robot?
Yeah. And people loved the Jibo, and that they thought it was more human-like and they were more likely to interact with it. So that was one experiment. The other talked about branding. And so if you change the wake word from something that did not connote branding, it turned it much more into a person for people, which honestly could be a little problematic, because I think it's easier for something to manipulate you if you think of it more as a person. And I don't know if I want my home robots manipulating me, because I don't really trust Amazon, especially now that Madam A is getting super chatty. So this is a really interesting paper. We'll do a link to it. I think it's interesting because I think there are certain use cases like companion robots where we're going to want them to be companions, like true companions. But I think we're going to want those to come from a different company than maybe Amazon or Google that might be trying to get us to buy stuff or to give up more data. I don't know. So
yeah, it needs to be a company that doesn't make its money off of data, product sales, and so on. It needs to deliver just the companionship and the assistantship.
Yeah,
right?
Like I would pay for that to happen, and that's how it makes its money. This is a story I didn't promise you in the beginning, but I'm going to throw it in here because, oh my gosh, it involves energy harvesting. And y'all know I love energy harvesting because we can't be replacing batteries on our sensors all day long. Atmosic, which is a startup I have covered a lot, again, see energy harvesting excitement, has launched a brand new product. It also announced $72 million in funding. So this is exciting. Their new product is a brand new self-powered, battery-free Bluetooth chip. Well, it's an SoC. It's a system on a chip, because you've got to have the energy harvesting. You got to have the MCU. You got to have the radio. But basically, it's Bluetooth 5.3. It's got an ARM Cortex M33F, and it can offer a little bit more computing smarts. It also supports ARM's Trust Zone, which is good, so that makes it more secure. And it's basically a super functional chip. And I'm really excited because that means Atmosic is not a one-chip wonder. Yay! Which is something that does happen. And with $72 million in funding, we can expect to see a lot more. So I'm really excited because this brings energy harvesting to more places. Atmosic's chips are used in some TV remote controls and a few other use cases, but we expect to see them in more. So, yay! All right, back to your regularly scheduled programming. In small news, Tado, the German smart home energy startup, they plan to go public. They're going to do a SPAC deal. And Tado is it's actually one of the first companies to make a smart thermostat. They have a smart radiator thing. They're actually a pretty cool company. So we'll just see if it ends up going public through a SPAC. A lot of companies are taking that route these days. I'm kind of ambivalent about it, but whatever.
All right, let's close it out with a new sensor. It may not sound glamorous because it's just infrared. It's near infrared, in fact, and it's based on some research done at the Eindhoven University of Technology. Now, normally with an infrared sensor, we use the sensor to gather light at the infrared spectrum, and then we use algorithms and compute power to analyze the data. That tells us what we're looking at. Maybe it's the heat of something, for example. What this proposed sensor does, we don't need the sensing algorithms. It can actually use what it sees to understand natively what is going on. And in particular, this is really interesting because it's a very unique application. The researchers can analyze milk and plastic, so they can tell without the compute power just what type of plastic is being used in a product or what the nutritional properties of the milk are. So that is pretty cool, especially if they can expand that, because yes, this sensor's really small, could be in a smartphone. It sounds like it's small enough it could even be in a smartwatch to me. And when I'm choosing what I want to eat, if I could just hold my watch near something and gather the nutritional value right on the display of my watch without too much compute or no compute, boy, oh boy, am I going to make, I may not make better choices, but I'll be better informed to make better choices on what I eat.
You'll know when you're making the bad choice, although you probably know that already.
I already know that now, but here I'll have hard data.
And a little bit more industrial focused, you could use this to automatically detect things like the ripeness of fruit. When you're picking something, like let's say you've got a robot picking things, it could look at that. Or in a receiving area, you could look at something like that for grocers, kind of checking and making sure their stuff is okay. As a consumer, you might be like, take your watch and be like, beep, 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 beep. This is the best strawberry. That feels kind of silly, but sure. Okay.
I'm pretty particular about my strawberries, so it's not that silly.
Okay, there you go. Once things are widespread, you never know, right? So I'm like, sure. Okay, Kevin bought a Keurig, but I one-upped him with my own appliance purchase. This week, I didn't buy it this week. I bought it several months ago, but it arrived this week. I got a GE Cafe induction electric oven and cooktop. And that's not the right order of those words, but y'all know what I'm talking about. And it has Wi-Fi. And I will say, I'm going to do like a formal review going on, but just some quick takeaways since I've only had it for 2 days. 1, cooks really well. Very excited about that. 2, the Wi-Fi, it's the first appliance that I have a Wi-Fi capable washer and dryer, and I haven't connected them because there's just no interest there. No reason for me to, unless it breaks, and then I'll connect it and be like, quick, tell me what's wrong. But I connected this straight away, and the reason was because I want to be, this is silly, but 2 reasons. 1, I thought, hey, it'd be pretty cool to preheat my oven using Madame A or Google, which are possible with this. And 2, I realized it has a tie-in to a device called the Heston Q Smart Pans. And I also wanted to get updates from GE, which they have been doing to make my oven more capable, either by like adding air fryer capabilities, or over Thanksgiving, they actually pushed out a turkey cooking program. So it's kind of like turning my GE oven into the June oven. So yay. But the induction cooktop has the ability with these pans to basically monitor the temperature of the pan and follow along with recipes made by Heston Q. So I was so excited to discover this because I was like, oh my gosh, this is like sous vide cooking without the sous vide machine, right? So and because I have to order new pans for the induction anyway, I was like, well, it's already here. I might as well order this pan. So I ordered my pan. It'll arrive in 2 weeks, so expect more on that front. But just broadly speaking, it was the first big appliance that I've purchased where A, I thought it was worth connecting, and B, connecting it brought so many more additional features and in true delight over something that I'm like, I don't know if people feel normally very excited about ovens and ranges, but I was like, I cannot wait to play, basically. So
Yeah, I'm curious in a couple of weeks how the smart pans work and integrate with the appliance itself. And I'm just going to say that we have propane here because we live in the sticks. So I'm not getting an induction cooktop anytime soon. But the pans from Heston, they're not really priced much differently from any other high quality pan. I looked at them last night, and they actually sell packages with a single induction. I'll call it a burner. I don't know what it doesn't. It's not a burner, but you know what I mean. A cooktop that was still reasonably priced. And I said to my wife, "You use the June oven for all these features. We may want to take a look at this package and get smarten up the range top."
I think it'd be great, like if you're in an apartment, like college dorm room. It's basically like it's a $200 hot plate, is what it is. But you don't actually.
It's safer.
Yeah, it's totally safer. If the pot's not on it, it doesn't get hot.
Exactly. So like for an apartment or a college student or for any place, I mean, it's just, you're not going to have a fire from your cooktop because there is no fire.
I mean, you could technically set your pan on, like the food in your pan on fire on the cooktop.
Sure.
But there's no like a stray dish towel on top of it. It's not going to set off anything. So
exactly.
Anyway, I am super excited. I will also say one little nitpick. Appliances, they're terrible. So GE Appliance, I love you. I also was excited when I bought it. It has the UL Gold security rating. No one told me about this, by the way, when I was buying the product, but that's okay. I knew. And UL Gold is not great, but it's better than nothing. So, and I like that GE, especially with something like an oven, is thinking about cybersecurity of their connected products. So yay there. And then the nitpick I have is getting my oven onto the Wi-Fi was just a ginormous pain in the butt. It reminded me of getting a product onto Wi-Fi back in 2016. Remember, y'all, I'm on an Android phone, so there's some extra dancing there, but
I didn't say it.
It's that old school, and there were QR codes. There were QR codes to get me to download the app and do all that. But when it came time to connect, I had to go in, I had to press some buttons on the settings menu. And then I had to go to, it had a soft AP. So it connected me to the GE Wi-Fi, put me on there. And then it was like, okay, now go out of the app, go to settings, pick the Wi-Fi network. You do that. And then it's like, okay, now I'll find your Wi-Fi network. But it was so old school, y'all. It was so painful. And I can't imagine. I mean, I hated doing that way back in the day. And I mean, it was my job. I can't imagine a normal person making their way through that.
Out of curiosity, do you know if it's a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi radio? Is it an older 2.4?
I don't know the radio. I can find out for you and tell you next week. But yes, I didn't have to worry about the issue of an old 2.4 gigahertz radio trying to connect on a multi-mode system where it's like, oh, I only talk to 2.4.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to mess with my Eero and turn that off. So
yeah, that's promising.
Anyway, all right. So that's my new oven. You can hear more about it when I start adding my accessories, and we're just going to have a grand old time. Okay, that concludes this segment of the podcast. Let us go to the segment where we talk to you, our listeners. It is the IoT voicemail hotline, and we have a new sponsor for the podcast hotline, y'all. It is Spin Dance, and Spin Dance can help you design, build, and support your IoT products. You can learn more about Spin Dance at www.spindance.com. And if you would like to call us at the IoT Podcast Hotline, you can give us a call at 512-623-7424. And you will also be entered to win a garage door opener, rather a smart garage door opener thing. We'll give you either the Chamberlain MyQ or the Miras one that works with HomeKit. So all of that awaits you if you give us a call. And this week's question I thought was kind of appropriate since I just wrote about LP WANs. So let's hear it.
Hi, Kevin and Stacy. This is Kevin from St. Louis. Love the show. And I had a question for you about Amazon Sidewalk and LoRaWAN. I was wondering your thoughts on if we would see that in the near term in the wearables market. So Amazon's fitness tracker or an Apple Watch. To me, that would make sense and replace some of the LTE functionality of, say, an Apple Watch or something of that nature. Wondering if you guys saw that as a possibility. Thanks.
Oh, Kevin, I love the way you're thinking on this because I love the idea of having a cheap, low power, wide area network that can do like activity trackers or sensors. And it's a little early for that, but it is definitely coming. So Amazon Sidewalk, for example, you can't actually, normal people cannot go and build on that yet. You have to apply with Amazon. So it's not generally available, but Amazon is working with a company called CareBand that is doing a wearable on the Sidewalk network. And the CareBand is going to have location tracking for elderly people and possibly a panic button. It depends on the band. So and it also has activity detection. So that is something that's going to happen and is already happening on that network. And then for basic LoRa networks, I think we're going to need to see a couple things happen. We're going to need to see better power management on LoRaWAN devices still for a good experience with a wearable. People are working on that. We're also going to need to see a little bit more capacity on LoRaWAN gateways. Right now, a lot of LoRa gateways, there's limits on the number of devices in a area that could be on the gateway. And I don't think there's a real standard there for that. It can range from like 1,000 to some people have built like multi-channel gateways that have like 25,000 devices. So we're going to need something like that too if everyone's going to have these wearables running around. So we need a little bit more evolution there. Kevin, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with where this is going and what Kevin's thinking. I don't think it's going to be on, say, an Apple Watch, for example. Apple's going to push LTE connectivity, charge you an extra $120 for that LTE radio, and you're going to pay $5, $10, whatever dollars per month for that service. But outside of Apple, I could see Amazon pushing the limits well beyond sensor data from remote IoT devices to text messages. Possibly you could do a voice if it's compressed. It's got to be.
I don't think you can.
It's got to be data that's not high bandwidth intensive. Could be notifications from your phone. But those kind of things. I don't think
it could be synchronous either.
Oh, if it can't be synchronous, then even voice would not happen, obviously. But text messaging certainly could be. Notifications from your app certainly could be. And it would be cheaper because, again, you wouldn't have the high cost of an LTE radio and you wouldn't have the power requirements of an LTE radio. So you could, instead of a 1-day battery life of an Apple Watch with LTE, maybe you have an Amazon watch with Sidewalk that lasts 3 days. It's who knows. So there's a lot of potential there, but because it's currently, I would say, semi-closed, it's hard to say where this is going to go.
Yes. All right. Well, that is our answer for you, Kevin. I hope it helps. And that concludes this segment of the show. Remember, if you want to give us a call at 512-623-7424, you'll be entered to win a garage door opener. Yay! Of your choice. And that concludes this segment of the show, but please stay tuned for our guest, Calais Nair, who is the co-founder and director of Plentify. We're going to be talking about energy resiliency and turning appliances into batteries of a sort using AI. Before that, we have a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Rightpoint. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Rightpoint, and Rightpoint is a global experience company on a relentless quest to make everything work better. I have Ben Johnson, the SVP of Digital Products from Rightpoint, with me here, and he's ready to tell us a little bit about the work they do. Hey Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey Stacy, thanks for having me.
Yeah, okay, so Ben, I wanted to ask you about how Rightpoint is making the Internet of Things work better.
At Rightpoint, we start any conversation about IoT around the idea of the experience a device will deliver for the people who use it. It needs to fit seamlessly into their day-to-day lives and make life easier. IoT is an ever-evolving space, and we've been working for several years now helping organizations strategize, concept, build, and launch their IoT products. One great example is our recent work with General Motors.
Yeah, I saw the General Motors keynote at CES this year. What work has Rightpoint been involved in?
We work with General Motors on their in-vehicle digital experiences. We first designed the connected in-car experience for the all-electric Cadillac Lyriq, which, by the way, is an amazing car and has a 33-inch curved digital display for the drivers and passengers to interact with. GM also tapped us to work on the Chevy Silverado, another all-electric vehicle which was announced at CES. They're putting connectivity at the center of the driving experience. We believe that's a powerful vision for the future of mobility and internet-connected vehicles, and we're really excited to be a part of it.
And what is something interesting in terms of the technology behind these new vehicles?
Technology is a huge enabler, and we had lots to work with, from real-time 3D, thanks to Unreal Engine, all the way to embedded 5G radios. There were almost limitless possibilities. Our team was tasked with designing the entirety of the in-car digital experience, everything from what it is like when you turn on the vehicle to what it's like when you engage cruise control. We even worked on an industry-first augmented reality heads-up display. Of course, the GM in-car experience also includes embedded Google services, Apple CarPlay, and Android Auto. But we're helping GM build an immersive layer on top of those services, unlike anything else in the industry.
Awesome. So, if someone wants to find out more about Rightpoint, where should they go?
You can learn more about Rightpoint, our work with General Motors, and our IoT capabilities by Googling Rightpoint IoT or visiting us at rightpoint.com/IoT. That's RIGHTPOINT.com/IoT.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Calais Nair, who is the co-founder and director of a company called Plentify. Hello, Calais. How are you doing today?
Hi, Stacey. It's good to be here.
I am so excited to have you. We are going to be talking about, y'all, it's my favorite, smart electricity, smart grids, demand response, all this stuff, basically trying to figure out how we can build more resilience into our electrical systems and incorporate more renewable energy. So it's going to be a fun topic. Y'all are going to like it. And to get us started, let's first talk about Plentify. What are y'all doing?
Stacey, first of all, thanks for having us. The classic way to start would be to talk about the problem that we're trying to solve and talk about the trends that are driving our business. So I guess it will come as no surprise to you that renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy in history. And it's coming online at an absolutely unprecedented rate. A stat that I saw recently is that in the US last quarter, about 95% of all new energy capacity was renewable. So this is by and large a good thing, but brings with it a massive problem. That problem is that there's a growing mismatch between when the electricity is generated, i.e. when the sun shines or when the wind blows, and when it's used. And the current plan is to store that energy using batteries. But the reality is, although battery prices are still continuing to fall, there's an alternative that is 5 to 10 times cheaper for storing renewable energy, and that's the appliances in your home. And so what we do, and Stacey, this is probably the most important concept I'll try and convey in this podcast, is that what we do is we separate when appliances use energy from when we use those appliances. For example, we can heat water at noon and still have hot water when we wake up and take a shower at 7 a.m. the next day. The good news is about 70% of residential demand is from appliances that can be managed this way. So water heaters, space heating, pool pumps, fridges, EV chargers. And what we're effectively trying to do is connect all of these assets together using software and allowing them to behave like a virtual power plant.
Okay. I think it's really important to clarify this for people because I, being the literal-minded technology person that I am, like, my goodness, how do you turn my water heater that already exists into a battery? That's crazy. So when you talk about storing this energy, you're not actually changing any aspect of my water heater, for example. What are you doing?
When people talk about storage in the energy sector, often what comes to mind is a battery. The reality is there's different types of storage. And in the case of water heaters, it's thermal storage. So if you think about what a water heater does, it takes one form of energy, which is electricity, converts it into another form of energy, which is heat, for use at a different time. So it's effectively a storage mechanism. And there are many appliances that operate in the same way. For example, EV chargers, they store energy for use at a different time, fridges, etc. And so if you think about it that way, there are lots of appliances that have storage properties in your home. As long as you add intelligence and a little bit of low-cost hardware to them, you can make them operate like batteries, which has very powerful implications for the energy system.
Okay, so I'm thinking I run a device called a Quanta on my water heater. And what it does is it basically lowers the energy consumption. I think of it as a conservation device. It lowers the energy consumption in my house by paying attention to when I need hot water and when I don't need it. It lowers the temperature of my hot water tank. And so it feels a lot like what you're doing. But again, I think of that as conservation, and you're calling what you're doing storage. So is this a semantic difference or is this an actual difference?
There's actually a fundamental difference. So what your current product is doing is, as you point out, making the water heater run more efficiently, which is a good thing. But however, the big need in the system is to not just get appliances to conserve energy, but also draw that energy at the most appropriate times. So, for example, you want appliances in your home to draw energy when it's cheaper and more abundant on the grid, or when there's renewable energy available. So what we do is not efficiency or conservation. It's actually about shifting when appliances draw power to the cheapest and cleanest times for the system and for the user.
So I think of this all the way back in like 2012, talking to people at my former utility. The big concern was electric cars coming on the grid and getting plugged in when people come home from work, and drawing a lot of power also when people are running stoves. And usually I lived in Texas, so the AC was on. It was a lot. It's the hottest part of the day. It was terrible. So the idea here is that my EV charger basically pays attention to access to renewables and charges the car when that access is available.
That's right. That's right, Stacey.
And it doesn't feed it back into my home or any other appliance. It is only for the appliance that it's dedicated for.
Exactly. That's right. So one way to think about it is, if you look at demand, energy demand, it's not static. It's variable. It's variable by day. It's variable by season. And historically, how utilities have tried to cater for that variable demand is by installing very expensive peaking power plants. That's both expensive as well as dirty. What energy systems are trying to move towards is to make demand itself more flexible, allow us to shift and shape it to match the available supply on the grid. And that's where systems like ours come in, where we are able to adjust or intelligently control appliances to draw energy at the most appropriate times for the grid.
So let's pick something that people are pretty familiar with from a demand response, because this is another evolution, it sounds like, in demand response in a way. And we'll use something like a smart thermostat. And, historically, if demand was going to be too high and they didn't want to go to, either it was a brownout situation or they just didn't want to go to dirty power, my utility would say, hey, lower your thermostat. And that was lovely. What does that look like if I have your sensors and your system set up on my HVAC system?
It's a great question. And so let's take water heaters. It's an appliance that we've chose to start with. It happens to be one of the major consumers in your home, and it also draws energy during the most expensive times for the grid, typically early mornings and early evenings. So what our technology does is we attach a IoT sensor to the water heater that collects data around your shower habits. It also has a relay that allows us to control that water heater on and off remotely. And we make decisions on when to turn that water heater on and off based on the available energy on the grid, but also based on what your needs are. So if we know, Stacey, you typically have a shower at 5 a.m. or say 7 a.m. in the morning and at 7 p.m. at night, we will make sure we preheat the water to the appropriate temperature outside of peak times so that you have the right amount of hot water at the right time to meet your needs, but in a way that still makes sense for the system.
Got it. I like how you were going to try to make me wake up at 5 a.m. That was cute. Not happening. So this is then a data analysis problem. Talk to me about how y'all developed the algorithms and how far along you are. And basically what you've learned, because this has actually been used already in South Africa.
That's right, Stacey. So our first devices have been in the field since 5 years ago. In fact, yesterday was our 5-year anniversary. And over that time frame, we've accumulated over 100 water heater years worth of data, probably one of the largest data sets of its kind in the world. And what that's allowed us to do is to predict hot water consumption patterns at a very granular level and be able to slice that depending on the customer segment that we're looking at. So over time, we've become much, much better at being able to predict when users need hot water, how much hot water they will need, and figure out when to time the operation of that water heater to deliver that requirement to the user.
So now, is this based on an individual home, or it sounds like you might have a couple algorithms for different types of demographics? Is the algorithm put on the device and then updated every now and again based on an aggregate, or is it based on my individual habits?
The data science operates at two levels. It operates at the household level. So we're able to build a predictive model of that individual house's hot water needs, as well as the thermal characteristics of that water heater. But importantly, it also operates across the fleet. So we're not just shaping demand at an individual level, but also across a cohort of houses or cohort of units. And that's really important because the goal of this type of technology is to shape demand at the aggregate level. In order to truly sort of flatten the demand curve, it's not sufficient to just be able to change patterns at an individual level. You have to coordinate across the entire fleet. And that's a very difficult data science problem to solve because you're not just making decisions on when Stacey's water heater needs to go on and off based on Stacey's requirements, but also on Stacey's neighbor's requirements and the person across the street and the person upstairs in a building.
And I think that's really important to note because especially here in the US, we think very individualistically. So I'm like, oh, my household is, conserving X amount of energy and I as an individual am doing this. But it is really important to start looking at it holistically across neighborhoods. And I'd be curious, when you look at this data across, and I don't know how you divide it, if it's by street, by neighborhood, by utility, what is your long-term vision for how electricity gets delivered, but maybe even generated? Because we talk a lot about generation at a microgrid kind of level.
I think our vision of the future is that electricity generation will increasingly become decentralized. We'll see a lot more self-generation happening. And actually that makes the problem of coordinating between supply and demand even more challenging. And we need a layer of intelligence that sits between the supply of electricity and consumption of electricity. And that's where we'd like to fit in, and other players like us are trying to fit in as well.
Let's talk about how you're getting these devices into homes in South Africa, and you are also coming into the US, so how you plan to do it here as well.
Sure. We're a B2B2C company. So our customers, they fall into two main categories. They're utilities and insurance companies who own or operate large fleets of residential appliances, and in particular water heaters for now. You might sort of raise your eyebrows and ask, well, I get utilities, but why insurers? So it turns out that insurers hate water heaters as much as utilities do because they tend to burst every 5 to 10 years. And when they do, they cause a ton of resultant damage to the home and drive up building insurance claims. So they are also looking for an IoT solution to manage the risk. And our technology happens to do both. So in addition to these energy benefits, we can also detect and prevent almost any fault that can happen with a water heater.
I love it. What I also like about what you're doing here is that you're building something that is smarter. So obviously love that, but you're also extending the intelligence both to risk reduction and to energy. And a lot of times I feel like when startups come at a problem, they come at it with one level of intelligence. And I think all that does is let us have a bunch of siloed devices that can only be smart in one way, as opposed to more general purpose intelligent. So I have neglected to ask how the heck this works. Do I replace my existing hot water heater? Is there a hardware component that I'm putting on an existing one? What happens?
Yes, Stacey. So the good news is you don't have to replace your existing appliances. The technology is designed to retrofit onto your existing water heater. So there's essentially 4 parts to the product. There's a IoT controller that attaches onto any electric water heater, collects data, and allows us to operate that water heater remotely. That data is sent to our cloud engine, which makes smart decisions on when to turn that water heater on and off and detect and prevent faults. The user gets an app where they can set their preferences and monitor their savings. And lastly, our customers get access to a dashboard where they can monitor the state of the fleet and the performance of the fleet.
And you keep saying appliances. I know you've got the water heater. Do you have any others, or what would the next appliance that y'all tackle be?
The good news is, from a data science perspective, our algorithms are largely agnostic to the appliance. So we can integrate with heat pumps, EV chargers, fridges, pool pumps, and so on. We've built out the use case for water heaters right now, but increasingly what we're looking to do is partner with OEMs to embed the hardware directly into the appliance that manufacture. We think that's the future. And what we're going to then focus on is the data science aspect, which is where our strengths are and where the bulk of the IP resides.
So I've just purchased a fridge like in the last 2 years. So in like another 6 years, when I'm buying a new fridge, the idea is that it might have your technology in it, which would allow me to, I guess it would not run the fridge as cold all the time, basically.
That's a good way of looking at it, Stacey. Yeah, the sort of fantasy that we have that sort of gets us up and out of bed in the morning is all appliances will be plentify inside, similar to, sort of the Intel Inside concept. So we would have, our chips built into the appliance at manufacture, and these appliances are connected to the internet and they can be intelligently controlled, but in a way that's never ever compromises on your satisfaction. So your shower should still be warm, and your EV should still have sufficient capacity to take you where you need to go the next day, and the food in your fridge should never be spoiled. It should still be cold, but at the same time delivering the benefits to the energy system that we all need, helping to build a more resilient system all around.
So I do have to ask about outliers, because if I'm going to get up at 5 a.m, a cold shower is going to be the worst thing, even though I normally get up at 7, like you said. How do you deal with outliers, and how do you ensure that this sort of thing works as intended for people?
We've always been surprised when we do data analysis on the behavior of users, and there's often very interesting or counterintuitive things that jump out at us from the data. So first of all, although we'd like to believe that all of us are creatures of habit, we do vary on a day-to-day basis. So, our showers are not exactly at the same times every day. You might have visitors over, or you might go on vacation. So you do need to cater for these edge cases more than you think. Our approach to doing this is, number one, to build in sufficient tolerance. So our overarching goal from a data science perspective is to guarantee hot water satisfaction, because we believe that if we don't deliver on that basic requirement, we're not going to see adoption of this technology at scale. The second is to give the user a certain level of control. So we do that through our app, for example, where they can set their schedules and preferences and also plan for these outlier events. So if they happen to be going on vacation, they can specify which dates they're going to be away, and knowing that the moment they come back, there's going to be a hot shower waiting for them. And then lastly, the algorithms that continue to learn. And as they become more intelligent, we kind of drive up that hot water satisfaction score.
There's a big effort, I think, in the next couple of years, which is actually why we're talking about this, between big companies, big appliance companies, companies that are in the smart home, to try to deliver energy resiliency almost as a service, right? So trying to think about ways that we can use technology, software, data analytics to anticipate what we need to move demand around in the home. And there are a bunch of different tactics for this, from software, from someone like Amazon. There are companies building smarter circuit breaker boxes to go on the outside of the house. So where would you fit in with some of these other companies that are trying to basically meet a lot of the same goals that you are, but with kind of a different angle?
Yeah, Stacey, I think, first of all, we see that level of activity And it's very, very encouraging because it proves to us that there's a real need, and that need is being recognized, and there are multiple parties trying to solve it. And quite frankly, it's important that we solve it as society because, as you've seen, there's an energy crisis brewing across the world. In South Africa, we suffer from rolling blackouts. In the UK, they've just recently had a major crisis with gas prices rocketing out of control. And in the US is no longer a stranger to blackouts. So it's a massive problem, and I think there's many parties that are trying to solve it. That's good. That's a good thing. Where we try to fit in is we believe that load management, intelligent demand management would need to happen both at the appliance level, which is where we're looking, but also at the household level. Companies like, I think, Span.io, for example, that focus at the household level. I think both approaches are required. Focusing only on the household level is, I think, runs the risk of leaving too much value on the table. And focusing only on the appliance level means that you're going to have value leakage at the interfaces. So I think these approaches are complementary ultimately. What I'm encouraged to see, though, is that there's a growing recognition that we need to ensure that these systems are interoperable. That's going to be driven either through regulation or by private enterprise, like what we've seen recently with the launch of Matter. I think the more players out there trying to solve this problem, the better for us. But we've got to make sure that the system works together in a harmonious way.
I couldn't agree more. I do hate those silos. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stacey.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.staceyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.